All right. So welcome to Montana Natural History Center's first NatureWebs session, Winging It. My name is Kelly. I'm a teaching naturalist at the Montana Natural History Center in Missoula. If you haven't found it already, could you go ahead and locate the chat window? It either is going to be flashing at the bottom of your screen in orange, or it might even be opened. It looks like some people are already finding it and writing in hello. If you wouldn't mind finding that, opening it up, and then writing where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see where we've got folks tuning in from. I know we have a few folks here in Missoula. Awesome. Bunch of Missoula representation. Looking good. Corvallis, Florence, so some Bitterroot representation. Nice. Polson, so we're going a little north. Fantastic. Whitefish, that might be our furthest north. Perfect. Lots of Missoula representation. We got a Bozeman person here. Fantastic. Colstrip, yay, way out east. Welcome. So in addition to myself, we also have another teaching naturalist with us. You can't actually see her, but she is co-hosting. She's going to be kind of checking in on the chat area. So if from time to time you have a question about the content or anything like that, just feel free to throw it in the chat, and she'll try to help you out the best way she can. Additionally, I may ask you to record some of your thoughts and ideas during the lesson into the chat. So we'll just leave that open, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to play a short video. I'm not going to have the sound on for this video because the sound is not really the important part. Instead, I want you to pay attention to the birds and their flight in this video. So as you're watching it, I hope that you'll look for observations about what you notice, what you wonder, and if it reminds you of anything you've seen before, specifically with regards to the birds and their wings. And you can go ahead and throw any of your noticings and wonderings in that chat box. So here we go. Awesome. So noticing specific species, I'm seeing geese, definitely. Different birds are flying in different ways, totally. If you can expand on that, that would be fantastic, Lisa, because that is a really, really good point. They are flying in very different ways. And folks, with the chat, you may need to adjust. There's a little blue bar that'll say all panelists and all attendees. If you pull that down, then everybody can see your chat. So if you want to share it out loud, basically that's the way to do it. So you can go ahead and do that. Awesome. So noticings about how the birds are tucking their feet in when they fly. Some guesses as to what species you're seeing, maybe storks, maybe geese. Awesome. They hinge in the middle of the wing. So when the wings flap, they hinge in the middle of the wing. Some really great noticings. Flying in a triangle, so looking at how birds operate in group flight. Fantastic. Well, a lot of you were noticing many of the things that I noticed, and it made me start to wonder. I started to wonder about, do all birds fly the same way? Does the shape of a bird's wing affect how it flies or patterns of its flight? And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. When we talk about different shapes of a wing, it's helpful to know some of the specific language that we use when describing the dimensions. So the first one you've probably heard of before is wingspan. We're just going to shorten it and call it span. Sometimes when we talk about span, we talk about from one tip of one wing to the other. But in this case, today, we're just going to be talking about the span of maybe one of the bird's wings. So that's our length. And then the other dimension we need to know about, and give a special name to is the chord. So the width of the wing, we're going to be looking at the length and width and how that affects flight. When we look at things like airplanes and aircraft, we use the exact same vocabulary to describe the dimensions of a plane's wing. So again, the span being the length and the chord being the width. So now I'm going to have you guys help me out with something. We're going to play a little game here. I'm going to launch a poll in just a second. So what you see or should see on your screen is a picture of a bird wing. So that's our structure. And right now we're looking at this specific bird wing. And then I've got a list of possible functions or jobs that you think this wing would do really well based off of its shape. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and it's going to come up on your screen, and I'm going to have you vote, kind of like a multiple choice quiz. And if this poll window is in the way, you can kind of move it around so you can still see the shape of the wing. So go ahead and take a minute to decide which job A might be best suited for, depending on that shape. Awesome, I'm seeing lots of votes roll in right now. Maybe we'll give it another 30 seconds to let everybody try to get their vote in. Almost 50% of you have voted. Still coming in, we're about 66% of us have voted. Maybe 20 more seconds. All right, so I'm gonna end the poll now. If you didn't get a chance to vote on this one, that's okay. You'll have a chance on the others. So a lot of you said that you think wing A would be best to fly a long distance. So I'm gonna stop sharing here. And let's see what the correct answer is. Awesome, to fly far without having to use a lot of energy. That is the best job for structure A. We'll talk more about why this is in just a minute. Let's bring up structure B. So here's a brand new wing. Looks a little thicker in the chord. I'm gonna remove choice 3 because we know that already belongs with wing A. I'm gonna relaunch a brand new poll with your new choices about wing B specifically. So here we go. Should be up on your screen here. All right, some votes rolling in. Put about 30 seconds on the clock here. Wow, you guys are moving fast on this one. Over 50% of you have voted. Holy moly. Maybe 10 more seconds. Let's see if we can get all 100% of you to vote. About 5 more seconds. I'm going to close out the poll, share the results. It looks like a lot of you decided or think that this structure is best suited to glide and circle. Let's see what the survey says here. To glide and circle around, nicely done. And again, we'll talk more about why that is in just a minute. Let's bring up our next wing structure. So structure C here, again, I eliminated 1 and 3 because we know that those jobs belong to a different structure. So poll 3 here should be showing up here in just a minute. Here we go. Less choices, so that's good news. It's starting to narrow down. Moving real fast now. Put about 20 more seconds on the clock here. All right, I'm going to end poll in about 5 seconds here, so get those in. All right, wow, a lot of you guys decided on this wing that it might be to hover, followed second place by maneuvering or moving from side to side really quick, or it could be a speed wing, some of us think. So the final answer here is to move quickly from side to side and to take off really fast. In other words, to maneuver. This one's kind of a tough wing. So here's our last wing. The good news is we have only 2 choices now, so we'll make this poll a quick one. This is poll 4. Should be showing up on your screen. Just 2 choices here. Which job is D best suited for? Put about 10 more seconds on the clock since this one's a little bit less of a choice. All right, about 5 seconds. All righty, wow. Most of you decided on this one, 89% of you who voted decided that this wing looks like it's a speed wing, not a hovering kind of a wing. So we're going to stop sharing here and let's see. To be fast. Yes, this is a speed wing. We'll talk more about what makes this a speed wing and how that differs from, say, a hovering wing. I'll go ahead and bring up that hovering wing here. So this is our wing that acts more as like a hovering wing that gets flapped around really fast where the bird can kind of stall out in the air. So here are our final lineup of 5 different wings and their associated functions or jobs. This is what they look like. Seeing them up on the screen, you can see how they're all quite a bit different once they're kind of grouped up there in together. So like I said earlier, when we were talking about the dimensions of a bird wing, the chord and the span, and then we're saying that, well, with airplanes, we do the same thing. We talk about the chord and the span of a wing. So there's a reason for that, and that's because most engineers, when they go to engineer aircraft, they're doing it because they want it to do a very specific job. So this is a Spitfire aircraft, and when they went to go engineer this plane, they wanted to make a fast plane. That was the primary function of this plane. So they wanted a fast plane and they wanted one that could move from side to side quickly. Remember the word for that is maneuver. And they wanted one that could take off in a very, very short distance and equally land in a very short distance. So when they set out to design this plane, they looked at birds who flew just like this. So an example of this kind of flyer would be a crow or sometimes raven. You're right, the Spitfire is a World War II plane. So this is a crow, and you can see kind of the same patterns, at least in the shape of the wings. Kind of a bit of a shorter span at least, but a pretty wide chord. Another example of how we've copied bird flight would be with a glider. Gliders are a really crazy aircraft because they don't require an engine to generate thrust. Instead, these gliders rely heavily on air currents. So being able to move up and down in the atmosphere to where the air currents are. And you can see that this glider has a really, really long span and a really narrow chord. This means that gliders can use those air currents and they don't experience too much drag. Now, drag is one of the forces that's required for flight, but it's a force that can slow down a bird or a plane if there's too much of it. So planes like this with wings like this do not experience as much drag as, say, that Spitfire. You've probably felt drag before. So if you've ever tried in a swimming pool to run through water, you've noticed it's really, really hard to break through that water surface. That is essentially the same exact thing. So that is drag. One of the birds that we've modeled gliders off of would be a tern. And you can see a very similar wing pattern here with that long span and kind of a skinny chord. Another example, this is a Lockheed spy plane. And the hint of what engineers wanted this plane to do is in the name, spy plane. So it has obviously a really long span, but it's also got a very wide chord. And when I look at it, it reminds me of a certain bird that's actually back in town. I've seen a bunch of them up in the sky going around in circles, kind of in a group. Do you guys know what I'm talking about or thinking about? If you have an idea, you can put that bird in the chat if you think you know what this bird was actually, or this plane was actually modeled off of. I'm seeing raven, I'm seeing hawk, close with the hawk. They're similar flyers. This is a black bird. It's usually all black. It's the turkey vulture. So a turkey vulture kind of flies in a very similar way, really stealthy, really similar to that Lockheed spy plane. Here's another example. This is an F-16. So you can tell that this plane really looks like it was designed to be fast all of the time. So it's got those swept back wings, and it's got a thick chord and kind of a medium span. So the bird that this was modeled off of would be a peregrine falcon. And you can see similarities in the wing shape. So this wing is a very thick chord and kind of a medium span, but that chord is thickest at its body, right? So that is a fast bird, and that is a fast plane. Last but not least, we've got our helicopter. If you've ever watched a helicopter take off and land, you notice that it goes up and down, and a plane requires a lot of space to get off of the ground, right? Part of this is due to the fact that a helicopter uses rotor blades, and I see some people guessing about which bird this one is most similar to, and if you guessed hummingbird, you are correct. That really short span and that short chord wing means that it can get going at such a high velocity that it can create or help create flight. Here are our birds, our feathered friends, all on one screen together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up one wing on each of these birds, and then I'm going to pull back in on the right-hand side of the screen all of those wing shapes that we've already been talking about. And I want you to imagine if you had the ability to use your mouse and drag and drop those wing shapes on to the birds, like paste them on the birds, how would you match them up? So you could answer by talking with somebody in your house, like you could talk about this, discuss it, or if you want to write in the chat box a couple of your matching pairs, you could do that too. So we'll take about 30 seconds for you either to talk about it with somebody or to go ahead and throw it into the chat. Some people are saying they take the top wing and put it on the falcon. D with the falcon, awesome. So some varying ideas. B for the vulture. Awesome. So some great ideas. Hopefully E and hummingbird. Hopefully you were able to make one, or maybe you're super speedy and you made all the matches. So we'll go ahead and reveal which wings go with which bird. A lot of you nailed it. You guys did awesome. Well done. So in this case, they were all in order, right? A, B, C, D, and E, all in order, copied and pasted right onto those birds. Let's talk specifically about our birds now. We talked a lot about the aircraft that have been inspired by birds, but in the bird world, ornithologists or people who study specifically just birds have given a special name to the types of wings that these birds are grouped into and how they fly. So birds with that really long span and narrow chord are called active soaring birds. And an example of this is the Arctic tern. So much like the glider, these birds rely on air currents. So the Arctic tern has the longest migration in the whole world. They literally go around the world or up and down from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Often their migration takes place over the open ocean. So they need to be super efficient flyers, and to do this, they use the air currents that are already in the atmosphere. And again, they don't experience a whole lot of drag because of that wonderful long span and narrow chord shape. Next up, we have our turkey vulture. This is an example of a passive soaring bird. If you've ever watched a group of turkey vultures, sometimes it looks like they're magically floating kind of like up into the atmosphere without actually flapping their wings too much. And this is because the shape of their wing allows them to catch something called thermals. And thermals are these vertical columns of hot air that are in our atmosphere, and they'll just kind of float up without actually having to flap about too much. And in fact, you'll see usually like numbers, multiples of them circling around And when they do that, it's called a kettle. They're kettling, going around on those thermals. Next up, we have our crow friend again. This bird has a really short span and a really wide chord, which means it's highly maneuverable, much like the Spitfire. It can tilt from side to side. It can hunt very efficiently because it can weave about in the forest. It can weave about through urban environments. And its wing almost looks like a stretched out circle. And there's a word for that. It's called an ellipse. So unsurprisingly, these wings are called elliptical wings. Next up here is our amazing peregrine falcon friend with that medium span, kind of medium to wide chord. But more importantly, it's what it does with that chord. You'll notice that the chord is really, really thick right by the body, and then it tapers off at the end. And what this does is it makes it cut through the air so efficiently that it experiences little to no turbulence. And turbulence is where it will move it from side to side or make the flight unstable. So that wing shape is super beneficial because the peregrine falcon takes most of its prey in the air, like it catches other birds in the air. That's how it makes a meal. So this is a handy adaptation. And if you've ever seen a peregrine falcon go into a stoop, it's pretty incredible. They'll actually tuck those wings back because of that awesome shape, and they will go over 200 miles per hour in their stoop. It's incredible. There's so many videos out there. I highly encourage you to dig one up. Last but not least, here is our adorable little hummer friend with that hovering wing. Short span, short chord. It means that it can get those wings flapping at such a high frequency that it appears that it's sometimes like floating or stalling in midair. And that's how most of the times it gets the nectar that it needs. So this is not the first time that we have stolen ideas from nature to make things. So here's an example of another way that we've stolen ideas from the natural world. This is a picture of somebody doing a sport called ice climbing. And traditionally, the ice climbing ice axes that they used to go up the ice wall had a straight handle on them. But they were finding that they would break because they were being repeatedly kind of hammered into a hard surface, and that wasn't good for them. So they went back to the drawing board, and one company invented an ice axe that looks like this. And what they did to invent this was they looked at the natural world and they said, what is the best example of a hammer in the natural world? And they looked specifically at bird bodies. So if this reminds you of any bird that you've seen before, go ahead and put it in the chat, because this shape was stolen directly from a bird. I'm seeing woodpecker, I saw duck, woodpecker is making an appearance. You're absolutely right. This was totally stolen from the woodpecker. And they stole it because the woodpecker, that beak takes a beating day in and day out. And it's because of the structure of the whole body, it's able to absorb a lot of energy. And so when they went to redesign their ice axe, they took that shape that already worked. Another example of this comes from Switzerland. There was a Swiss engineer back in the day named George de Mestral, and he was going for a walk with his dog. And his dog became covered in these seed pods from the burdock plant. So once he got his dog home and deburred, he took all those burrs off, he decided to look at one of those burrs under the microscope. And he noticed an amazing structure when he looked at these burrs up close. And he decided that rather than to be angry about all the ones stuck on his dog's fur, he might be able to invent something out of this structure. Any ideas what he made? I'm already seeing some guesses. Velcro. Velcro came up 3 times. You guys must be mind readers or you are historians. You are absolutely right. Velcro is what was invented from this. This act that we do as humans, biomimicry, this is the practice that learns from and mimics the strategies in nature to solve human design challenges. So airplanes and ice axes and Velcro are certainly not the only things we've designed based off of the natural world, but there's some examples of how engineers have used nature to solve human design challenges. And today, you guys are going to be the engineers. You guys are going to be inspired, hopefully, by bird wings and flight, and create your own glider that does a specific flight job. And we'll talk more about how we're going to do that in just a minute. We're going to be using the engineering design process to go about inventing a glider that does something really, really specific. And I brought up all the steps here that we're going to start working through. So hopefully you have a piece of paper handy and a pencil or a pen so that you can join us. So our inspiration today is going to be given to you. Now, I don't want to say that it always has to come from somebody else. I hope that you're inspired by a ton of stuff outside. The sky's the limit. But today, our inspiration is going to be bird wings, and specifically how bird wing shapes affect flight. So we have our inspiration, which means we can move on to the planning portion of our process. So to plan. To plan is to figure out what you want your glider to be able to do. So I want you to take a minute right now to write down what you want your glider to be able to do. And I brought them up on the screen because we've got some options here. You might want to make one that maneuvers. You might want to make one that soars, or maybe a high-speed one, or maybe you want one that kind of hovers and falls to the ground. Totally up to you. Take about 20 seconds to write down your plan on a piece of paper. All right, it was cool to see some of your plans coming in through the chat as well, very cool. So now, past the planning stage, we need to move into the design phase. How do we design? Well, your design is going to depend completely on the plan that you just made. So I'm going to share my idea here. My plan to build a fast glider. That means that my design needs to have a wing shape that I think is going to be a speed wing. Now, if you didn't choose to have a fast glider, your wing shape is probably not going to look like mine. So I'm going to bring up the other ones around here. Depending on what you chose in your plan, go ahead and sketch out really, really rough sketch. Does not have to have feathers and all of this, just a rough shape about what kind of wing shape you plan to build. And you can just sketch that on your paper. Take about 30 seconds to sketch out your shape. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to go ahead and sketch out a really, really rough shape of what you're going to hopefully build, because we are going to talk about how the build portion of this process goes. So after our time ends here in the webinar, I'm going to actually give you a link that will send you to a step-by-step video that walks you through how to actually build or assemble your glider. I figured that would be easier for you guys to be able to work through it at your own pace, rather than all 43 or 44 of us trying to go all together, and some of us being a little bit slower, some of us being a little bit faster. So this glider video will tell you exactly as far as the size of paper you're going to need to use and how to assemble it. So this is going to be a little more helpful than trying to do it together right now. But before I send you out on your own to go build your own glider, let's review our design process, because this should be at the heart of what you're doing. Obviously, we've been inspired, we've planned, we've designed. Now we're at the build portion. So after you build your glider, you are going to go test it. Now, chances are it's not going to do exactly what you thought or hoped it was going to do. That's okay. That is part of the beauty of engineering. Usually engineers don't get it right on the first go. That just means you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and tinker with it and figure out what worked, what didn't, and then go back and retest it. After you retest it, now you may have to go back and redesign again. You get the idea. At the very end, I want you to reflect though and think about what worked, what didn't, and are you inspired by anything else? The hope, and the reason that it's in this circle, the hope is that once you get to the reflect portion, when you look back on this process, you'll be inspired to build or do something else. So I want to say thank you so much for tuning in and learning with me. Happy flying, good luck. And we're going to be doing more of these webinars, different topics, every Tuesday at 10:30 Mountain Time. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the video in the chat. Hopefully you'll be able to access it that way. If you can't access it through the chat link, feel free to go back to Montana Natural History Center's webinar page, the NatureWebs page, and you should be able to access it that way. So thanks again for tuning in. I'll leave this open and I'll keep inserting the link. Have a great day and happy flying, guys. Bye.